So over to you, Karin. Thank you so much, all the panelists too.
Great, thank you, Mathilda. You introduced everybody, so I don't have to, which is great. But welcome everyone to our first panel. We really felt that because this seemed to be sort of where a lot of the key threats against writers are occurring these days, that it would be really important to focus in on this panel on sort of digital repression and the various way that this can affect writers of all types. So firstly, I'm going to provide a very quick sort of global and regional overview. I don't want to take too long because I really want to be able to focus in on our panelists and have a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. But I'll try to provide a little bit of a global picture. First, taking a little bit of data from PEN America's Freedom to Write Index, which we just released last week on May 1st. If you look sort of at the global picture and global data, what we found is that last year in the index, 180 online commentators had been jailed in 2023 for various periods of time. And this is the highest number in the last 5 years. The number has been growing every year. And this demonstrates really that authorities in a pretty wide range of countries are focused to try to crack down on expression online, most likely because of the immediate reach and the global impact that online expression has. We also have about a third of the cases, almost a third of the cases in our Writers at Risk database includes 364 active cases of online commentators or writers who are facing various types of threats for their online commentary. What we really see is that there are very high numbers of online commentators, particularly in countries where media and publishing is already very restricted in other ways. So where there is very little outlet for independent or dissenting news and information, either in the media and in literary publishing, this is where online expression really flourishes and is the only area where people are able to express dissent. So this includes countries that we've seen, over the years have consistently been very repressive, such as China, Vietnam, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and a number of others. But I'd also point out that most of the cases that PEN America added this year from Israel, Palestine, to our database and index also involved individuals who had very likely been detained because of their writing online. In terms of the different types of threats that we see in this sphere, obviously surveillance is a really major issue with, Pegasus spyware or other types of surveillance being deployed against writers, journalists, activists in a number of countries all over the world, both very repressive countries as well as much more democratic countries. In some countries, such as Iran, we've even seen over the last year or two intelligence services who have hacked into writers' accounts and then are trying to trap acquaintances, or have written to NGOs that provide assistance and protection services to writers and journalists at risk, pretending to be either a writer at risk or a relative of a jailed writer. So these are very sort of urgent issues that many writers have to deal with, whether they are sort of in their own country or even writers in exile. Of course, we've seen an increase as well in online harassment, which includes trolling, and sort of, in some cases, this is government-directed trolling at the behest of government authorities who pay sort of what looks like independent people writing online to troll different writers. And I would say this is particularly difficult for, women who get gender-specific slurs, as well as members of ethnic and religious minorities. We've also seen sort of traditional legal charges, which, laws which have been used against writers for offline expression, either being deployed against online expression or specific laws being developed and then used against writers for online expression. And an example of this would be the Digital Security Act in Bangladesh. Looking a little bit at some of the regional trends that the regional coordinators from PEN International have also identified. In Europe, which one would think would be a little bit, I think, less immune, less affected by this. So this is actually not the case. And we've seen a number of cases where spyware has been used against journalists all over Europe. And this includes countries such as Azerbaijan, Russia, Greece, and Hungary, and as well as in the Balkans. So these are all, a wide range of countries where we've seen Pegasus spyware being used against journalists and writers. In the Asia Pacific, Obviously, I've mentioned China and Vietnam in terms of having very, very strict regulations that control online content. And in China, for example, there were even new regulations passed in 2023 that would further tighten online content. In India, we've really seen a crackdown against online media platforms in the last year or two. In late 2023, NewsClick, which is a major online outlet, there were huge raids affecting dozens of journalists. The editor-in-chief, Prabir Prakayasta, is still in custody. And we've seen, again, in Southeast Asia as well, a crackdown on online expression prior to elections, for example, in Cambodia. Myanmar continues to be very, very limited in terms of the internet, with shutdowns, surveillance, as well as charging people under laws targeting online expression. In some cases, writers and other activists have been subject to prison sentences of dozens of years. And finally, in Latin America, we also are seeing very similar trends in terms of the use of Pegasus surveillance software, for example, in Mexico, which has been used against journalists and activists. We've also seen significant online harassment and trolling in countries such as Brazil and El Salvador and Colombia as well. So I'll stop there, and I would really love to turn it now over to our amazing panelists. So we have a great panel coming up. I will try to sort of ask a few questions to them and go around in a bit of a round robin just to keep it a little bit interesting and more dynamic. And then actually at the request of Can Dündar, who was unfortunately not able to join us because a Turkish journalist colleague of his passed away on Friday and he needed to speak at the funeral this afternoon. He was also very interested in talking about not just the problems affecting writers in this realm, but also what solutions could be. So we will try to leave a little bit of time at the end for talking about solutions and also for Q&A. But firstly, I would like to just sort of throw an opening question to all of our panelists joining us. In terms of maybe starting off from your own personal experiences, maybe just giving us a little bit of a brief overview for a few minutes each of how you personally have faced these issues yourself, if you have been sort of the subject of surveillance or other online harassment or other targeting, and just speaking a little bit from your own personal experience first before we open it up. Katerina, would you like to start us off?
Sure. Thanks, Karin, for that overview of all the issues. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Katerina. I'm currently the editorial coordinator at Engage Media, a digital rights nonprofit primarily operating in South and Southeast Asia. And before I went into the digital rights route, I was a reporter with Manila-based news outlet Rappler. I left Rappler in the early months of the Duterte administration in 2017, but over the years, I have been in touch with my colleagues and I have heard firsthand from them about the threats that they had faced, especially from such a combative administration at that time. And I can speak a little bit later on how this kind of have affected the landscape now. During the Duterte administration, for Filipino journalists, these years were marked by relentless cyber attacks, threats, and insults from trolls. My colleagues and we, seeing the social media behind Raptor at the time, we've been receiving a lot of insults and threats, and it was very taxing on one's mental health, as you can imagine. And what worsened it was that it was also the president himself making those attacks. And the idea was basically to undermine and erode journalist credibility in the eyes of the public. And that has kind of facilitated a muddled information environment that was conducive to disinformation, which also kind of wreaked havoc on Philippine democracy, as will be seen, and its effects in elections. There were also at the time rampant red tagging or branding anyone who is critical of the government as being affiliated with the communist insurgency. Too often, those online red tagging attacks translate into real world violence and death. So if you're red tagged online, there is a real risk of you being targeted offline as well. And the one thing that was also facing Rappler at the time was the weaponization of the rule of law against critics. Rappler at the time have been very critical of the Duterte administration, especially in the war on drugs. And for that reporting, we have faced a slew of different lawsuits and accusations. And currently, there's still a pending cyber libel lawsuit against our CEO, Maria Ressa, and one researcher whom I have worked with in the past. I have also been tangentially involved in that because I was part of the story that was the subject of that lawsuit. And the appeals process is currently ongoing, and we're hoping that it would be thrown out. Cyber libel carries a sentence and a penalty that's higher by 1 degree than traditional libel. So you can imagine that the difficulties for a journalist working and being slapped with a cyber libel lawsuit would have an impact on one's work. Currently, under the Marcos administration, these overt attacks have ceased, but the Duterte era damage remains. There's still some erosion of credibility among the media. So the landscape for Filipino journalists is you can argue it's marginally better. There's no very overt attacks, but there is still some lingering effects of those years from the Duterte administration. I'll pause here for now. Thanks, Karen.
Great, thank you so much, Katerina. Yonatan, would you like to go next, talking to us about Eritrea?
All right, absolutely. Thank you so much. Good morning, good day, everyone. Before I start talking about my personal experiences, I would just like to give a brief outline about our situation. Once again, I'm Yonatan Tewelde, representing PEN Eritrea, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to address you today. I want to shed light on the pressing issue that is affecting our people in Eritrea, where the freedom of press is virtually non-existent because we have one of Africa's most oppressive and brutal dictatorships. So, as was mentioned earlier with the introduction of Dawit Isaaq, the independent media in Eritrea has faded into the background since 2001, when at least 18 journalists were arbitrarily detained. They were never taken to court, and their whereabouts are unknown. And one of those is Dawit Isaaq, who was given the empty chair recognition. In the same manner, Emmanuel Asrat was also previously recognized as with the same recognition. So at the moment, since we don't have any sort of media that allows dissident voices to speak to the power, to the brutality of the regime in Eritrea, the only way that any type of activist media work is being practiced is essentially in the diaspora, where Eritreans, as you probably all know, are one of the largest groups of refugees entering Europe and other destinations. And this large group also obviously includes many journalists and writers and media producers. So what is happening today is we all, including myself, are organizing and are creating content and are trying to communicate and broadcast back to Eritrea. So we have some possibilities that includes the use of satellite television, for example. So we have shortwave radio stations such as Radio Erena, Radio Asana, at least 2 or 3 radio stations. We also have now about 4 or 5 television stations that broadcast via satellite. So although the regime has a very strict control in terms of what can be broadcast, what can be published inside the country, but we are trying to overcome that by the use of new technology and new media, which gives me a great hope. But that activism and that practice comes at a great price for those of us who are working in the media. So I work in REPM, for example, which is a dissident-based activist media organization that broadcasts from the US into Eritrea. And as you can imagine, we face a lot of trolling personally, both on our YouTube channel, on our personal message, and this include threats and warnings that we're never allowed to go back to our country, that we will never see our parents and our family members, and the list goes on. That the threats are always ongoing, And a lot of the threat doesn't just come from the government agents, however, also from the large number of supporters of the regime. So ironically, although Eritrea is one of the worst dictatorships, the regime also enjoys a very strong support in the diaspora. So the supporters of the regime, including family members, get on board in the trolling of dissidents and those in the opposition. So we face a lot of stigmatization, discrimination from friends, from family members, and often we have had some colleagues that were personally assaulted and attacked at different points. However, I'd like to state that the type of assaults and attacks that we face, especially those of us living in the West, is very minimal in comparison to what has happened to our colleagues back in Eritrea due to the fact that they are thrown in jail. We're not even sure if they're alive or not, because since 2001, it has been 23 years now. So yes, we do face some bullying, some insults, but we always try to remember why we are doing what we are doing, and we try to be resilient. So overall, I don't want to take more time. This is what the situation looks like for us. Thank you.
No, that's great, Yonatan. Thank you so much. And maybe Paola, you could go next and tell us a little bit about your situation personally and what you've experienced in this area.
Thank you. And well, my English is very Spanish or Peruvian English.
That's
So
okay. No problem at all.
Okay. So well, since in the last 10 years in Peru, the method used by criminal organizations to silence journalists is to denounce them using lies before the judiciary and the prosecutor's office. The Attorney General's office can prosecute anyone who is accused of falsehood because it's an entity that lacks mechanism to filter the veracity of the allegations and is therefore used as an instrument to investigate journalists. In my case, since 2011, I investigated a Catholic organization called Sodalicium, de Vida Cristiana, founded in Peru in 1971, and I published a book in 2015 about the organization with Pedro Salinas. And then I began alone to investigate their how they grow in the money in Peru. They are really rich, and I follow one of the mottos of journalism, that's follow the money. And then is how my problems start. Since 2018, I have been the target of a massive to ruin my prestige as a journalist, and they want the goal of that operation is that I get prosecuted in the judiciary and the public prosecutor's office, and that happened. So what they did in my case is to invent lights as a trial balloons and test which one work in their ecosystem of disinformation. And from there, they order and package the lies and send them to the prosecutor's office, where they prosecuted me for such serious crime as money laundering and illicit enrichment. As a female journalist and writer, they have sought to attack me by publishing private information about my children. I have been portrayed as someone's servant or slave in order to belittle my talent as a journalist. And my body has been talked about in social media in a disrespectful way, saying things like my organs are not worth $1,000. It's not all bad news in my story. In November 2022, Pope Francis received me privately at the Vatican as a show of solidarity. And I talk about the organization, Sodalicio, against me and other journalists. So 8 months later, after the meeting with the Pope, he himself decided to send a mission to Peru and to meet and listen in person to the survivors of Sodalicio. And we also tell them how the organization persecutes and want to discredit the journalists here. I think this mission will get a report in the next July. But I think in my case, the best strategy was to have as ally to the international community, the embassies such as United Kingdom, United States, and the European Union has been key, because if I don't have that friendship and solidarity, I will be now in prison. And I think that it's important in Peru, in Latin America, in South America, where they don't kill journalists, but they put in process that are really based on lies, that we have to have as allies all the community international, as PEN International too, because it's the only way to make change in the country and to get listened with the judge or the prosecutors. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paola. That's really, really helpful. And now, last but definitely not least, it's a great pleasure to have with us Mosab Abu Toha from Gaza. And he will be talking to us about his own situation first, and then hopefully a little bit more broadly as well later. Mosab, please join us.
Thank you, Karin. Thank you so much, PEN International, for organizing this very important and global issue. An event about this international and very important issue. I'm talking to you from Gaza, from Cairo, not from Gaza. I think if I were in Gaza right now, I wouldn't be able to talk to you because there is no reliable internet connection, and I might not be alive at the moment. Maybe as some of you know, I was kidnapped by the Israeli army when I was trying to evacuate North Gaza and head to the Rafah border crossing in South Gaza. It's so far 142 journalists have been slaughtered by the Israeli army. Many of them were killed with their families. So these are just journalists. I mean, the 142 people were just only journalists. There are many university professors, many writers and poets, one of whom became internationally famous, Rifat al-Arahir, who was killed with his sister and brother and their children. I remember publishing my first essay with the New Yorker magazine on October 20th. And it was the title of that essay was "The View from My Window," and it was about my trip back home to our home in Beit Lahia, North Gaza, after we evacuated it 4 days later. I wrote that essay about returning and trying to salvage and rescue some food and some clothes from my house. 8 days after that, our house was bombed, and thank God no one was inside. Otherwise, me and my parents and my children and my wife and the families of my 2 other siblings would be killed. About my experience with social media and the censorship by so many platforms is that whenever I post something about the death of families, especially women, I mean mothers here, and their children, I get some comments, by some Zionists saying, ask Hamas to free the hostages. Just imagine posting about the death of so many innocent people, about the bombing of hospitals and schools and universities, and someone just coming after 100 days of October 7th, after the slaughtering of about 20, I mean, at the time it was about 20,000 people that were killed, and just simply, where are the hostages? So that was a very painful experience, posting about the tragedy of what's happening in Gaza, and people are just asking about hostages, which is not the only problem that Israel is trying to resolve. Just 2 days after October 7th, Israel decided to cut off water to cut off electricity. You know, everything is controlled by Israel, by the way. So they could cut off the electricity, cut off water, and they bombed the internet companies in Gaza. They bombed the telephone companies in Gaza. So Gaza was in complete blackout. There was no electricity, no water, no internet connection, no even calling, whether your parents, your siblings, your neighbors, to check on them. So that led to the death of so many people, because when you have no internet, when you don't have a phone signal in your area, you won't be able to call the ambulances or the fire fighters to come and rescue some of the people who were buried under the rubble. Maybe they were alive, they were still alive at the moment. And there are some examples of Instagram and Facebook removing some of my posts just because there are some photos of people who were killed or who were kidnapped and who were forced to be naked. So Meta would say this content should be removed, or otherwise we would limit the reach of your future posts. So they were asking me to remove things that were very important for the whole world to witness. And most of the time I would say, okay, I want this to be on my page, and I don't care about what you are going to do to my future posts. And one shocking example of something that Meta removed is that I posted 5 days ago something about some of the things that happened to me when I was kidnapped, and someone emailed me and they said Instagram removed her comment on my post. She just wrote, "I'm so sorry. Thank you for your bravery in sharing it with us. I hope that I'm doing so, and the load lightens for you, even just a fraction. Sending a lot of love." And she sent me a screenshot of that. So the message says, "We removed your content." So Meta removed a comment that someone commented on my post, sharing their sympathy and their love and admiration for me, just because I am who I am. So anyone who is commenting on my post, it means that they are committing a crime by commenting on something that's based on what happened to me. So these are some of the experiences. I think there are so many other stories to share, many of which are on my Instagram, on my Facebook, on Twitter. And the killing of so many journalists and so many writers and poets led some people like me to evacuate Gaza. I mean, if I were a single person, if I didn't have children, I won't think for a minute of leaving Gaza. I would be there with my parents who are still stuck there. I would be with my students and my neighbors and continue to write about what's happening there. But even though I'm here in Cairo, I haven't stopped writing and sharing what I read and translating and posting about the experiences of my family who is still being starved in North Gaza. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mosab. That was really powerful, and we are very grateful and happy that you are out of Gaza and able to speak out and talk about what's going on. It's very important that your voice is heard. So we're really glad that you're able to do that from relative safety in Egypt. Katerina, maybe we'll go back to you a little bit. I know you wanted to talk a little bit more also about sort of the broader trends in the region as well, and maybe some of the similarities and differences that you've seen between the situation in the Philippines and some of the broader trends that you've seen, because I know in your current position you do sort of have a broader role where you're looking at some of the bigger picture and the trends as well. So I thought we'd go back to you and start that off, and then if any of our panelists would like to offer some other comments or thoughts on sort of bigger trends in their countries or regions, we can do that as well. But yeah, Katerina, maybe go back to you to start.
Thanks, Karin. You've actually already mentioned a lot of it in your overview earlier about how writers and journalists still face a clampdown on freedom of expression, harassment through multiple lawsuits, censorship and surveillance, especially on online platforms. And I wanted to kind of zero in on how this was most prevalent during the pandemic. Last year, Engage Media worked with several writers across South and Southeast Asia to produce an article series called Pandemic of Control, which looked into how governments adopted tools and policies of digital authoritarianism under the justification of addressing the COVID-19 crisis. And while that article series was very heavily focused on COVID-19, we believe that it also had the rights infringing policies and tools that were enacted during that time still have lingering effects today. And the common thread among the articles was that the pandemic provided governments with opportunities to increase surveillance and clamp down on free speech through things like anti-fake news laws or the widespread use of contact tracing apps without clear safeguards on digital privacy and how these are actually being used and how these go beyond the scope of being used for a health crisis. During the pandemic, for example, we saw how governments clamped down on critics of lockdown rules or anyone who was criticizing pandemic mismanagement. In Indonesia, for instance, there have been cyber patrols to control COVID-19 narratives online, supposedly to quell public fears, but these online political influencers were also used to rally public support for government policies to go business as usual, go back to supporting businesses and make the economy run again, basically. In countries like Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and the Philippines, there were threats of arrest against those posting content deemed detrimental to the state, particularly those criticizing pandemic mismanagement. And an example of this is the one that you cited earlier about the Digital Security Act in Bangladesh. There's also been another such law in the Philippines, which was enacted at the height of the pandemic and was also kind of treated as an anti-fake news or anti-COVID-19 disinformation law at the time. Aside from these supposed disinformation laws, there have been some laws for national security that were used to facilitate surveillance or harass journalists and critics. And the common theme around this is that they tend to be vague, they tend to be overbroad, or giving a lot of control to state authorities and purports to be for the public interest or for public safety. While the pandemic was going on in the Philippines, the anti-terror law was passed. And the criticism around that is that the definition of terrorism was vague and overbroad and can be used to target political opposition. And while the Supreme Court struck down two provisions, the current law still remains flawed, since it allows security forces overbroad powers to conduct surveillance. And an anti-terror council can designate groups as terrorists without due process. The resolutions of the anti-terror council have actually been used to for the National Telecommunication Commission in the Philippines to order internet service providers to block websites over alleged terrorist links, and these websites tended to be alternative media outfits like Bulatlat and Pinoy Weekly. The legal system, as mentioned earlier, have also been used to threaten the very existence of media outlets by targeting the business interests as pressure points to silence them. In the Philippines, this was with the shutdown of the country's largest broadcasting network, ABS-CBN, over tax issues, and the same has been tried with Rappler. And in Cambodia, we've seen the forced closure of Voice of Democracy by having its license revoked. And aside from this, there have been very physical threats against journalists. In the Philippines, there has been the case of the killing of a radio broadcaster live on television, live on air in the Philippines. And in Myanmar, aside from internet shutdowns being used to cut off information flow, there have been real risks to journalists going through military checkpoints, for instance. We have, at Engage Media, have conducted a study on how journalists in Myanmar continue to practice their safety while reporting. And we've seen that aside from the digital threats against them, they really have to exercise a lot of caution, such as trying to blend in and appear as ordinary citizens, removing apps on their phones that might give away their status as journalists, the use of digital security tools like VPNs or secure messaging app could actually be detrimental to them. And this could have an impact on how we might think about supporting journalists in Myanmar or in similar situations, for instance. And the surveillance infrastructure is still very much ongoing in Myanmar and in different parts of South and Southeast Asia. And I believe this is also the trend in other regions of the world as well.
No, that's great, Katerina. Thank you so much for such a really good overview. I'd like to, Yonatan, if you have anything else to add about just how you and your colleagues, I guess, have managed to, the impact that this has had on you and how, how you've managed to sort of try to deal with digital threats and surveillance, even working, as many of you have to do, from exile. I just wanted to check if you had anything else to add on this as well
Yeah.
from your perspective.
Certainly. Thank you. But first, I also wanted to speak of what Katerina was mentioning earlier in regards to how the COVID pandemic was used in her context as an excuse to crack down more on journalists. And that was kind of reminding me of our situation back in 2001, because this has almost become sort of a pattern with authoritarian regimes. Whenever there are major international events, that they use those as excuse to do things that would otherwise elicit a lot of uproar from world leaders and communities. So in September 2001, September 11, when the eyes and hearts of the world were in New York with the disaster and the chaos that ensued, then what happened in Eritrea was our president, Isaias Afwerki, who had been planning for the arrest of all of his critics and his journalists, but was waiting for the right moment, was very quick to arrest all of his critics, like half of the government leaders, officials, and we're talking about generals, high-ranking ministers and cabinet members, and also all independent journalists at the time were arrested in 2001. So these big major world events are always, unfortunately, good opportunities for authoritarian regimes. So when I think about it, and looking at reports that come from Eritrea, it's always talking about journalists and writers who were arrested in 2001, but you don't hear about reporters or other people being arrested since then. The only major arrest or wave of arrest we've had in Eritrea since 2001 was in 2009, when the only non-government sort of like a radio station that we had in the capital city, Asmara, was shut down and the reporters were all arrested. But then since then, we have not had the arrest of any independent journalists. So this does not mean that the press condition in Eritrea is good, right? It absolutely is not. In fact, we ranked bottom, like the very bottom, 180 out of 180 this year in RSF reports. So the problem in Eritrea is very unique, and the problem is that we have reporters and writers and journalists and critics who have been in jail since 2001. They have never been sentenced. They have never been taken to, their families have never had the opportunity to go and visit them. No one knows where they are, and no one knows which of those arrested are alive and which of them are not alive, and in what type of health situation they are. However, even with all of that, when you are in this kind of like a crazy situation where you don't have any more new journalists being incarcerated or taken to the court or taken by the police or detained, what happens often is that a lot of people may sort of like divert their attention away from what is happening in Eritrea, because you're always talking about the same group of journalists over and over and over again. It's always Dawit Isaaq or Ramane El Asrat, which is terrible. But at the same time, it also sort of like makes the situation look less difficult than it already is. So we are sort of like drained out of our journalists and our writing and our freedom of expression inside the country. But the only way we've been able to overcome this is by way of diaspora-based activism, diaspora-based writing, which is sort of like giving a little bit of hope, a little bit of and a little bit of voice to our people who are inside. And as I mentioned earlier, yeah, there are a lot of intimidations, a lot of personal attacks. However, we have not heard of any Eritrean journalists abroad who are severely concerned about their safety or about the attacks that are falling on them, because there's always that sense of comparison of like, we have those brothers and sisters in Eritrea arrested in Communicado, and we don't know where they are, and they've been there for 23 years. So I don't feel like it's so when you guys ask me, Karin, when you ask me about my personal situation, the types of intimidation that I face, and when I think about like all the trolling on Twitter or X or YouTube and all these other platforms, like sometimes I don't even feel it's to talk about those, because that is literally nothing in comparison to the deaths and the suffering that these reporters who have been suffering in jail for more than 23 years are carrying. So that in general is our situation.
Yes, thank you, Yonatan. That's really great. And definitely just to point out, I mean, the range of, I think, types of repression or harassment people can face in exile ranges, from trolling, which, as you said, is not maybe as serious, but we have seen, of course, really very serious cases, what's called transnational repression, where we have seen sort of assassination attempts, poisoning of a Russian journalist and writer last year. We've seen death threats against Iranian writers in the U.S. or kidnap attempts, and then of course Jamal Khashoggi, the writer and journalist who was murdered by the Saudis in the consulate in Turkey. So that the range of experiences that writers and journalists in exile can have is can range from very severe to mild forms of online harassment. Paola, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add just about more broadly the situation in Peru or in Latin America, and then we'll turn to Mosab as well.
Yes, I want to add one thing. I think it's a invisible damage to freedom of expression. All the campaigns against the journalists to put there in the judiciary and the prosecutor's office, because it's invisible. Because you need time to summarize your case, find money to defend yourself, and time to seek meetings with the international community. None of that has anything to do with my work as a writer, and that's why they do it, because they want to divert you from your work.
No, great, Paola. Thank you so much. And I know, Mosab, I know you have to leave in a few minutes, so maybe if you'd like to, give us sort of any final thoughts or talk a little bit more about your experiences or the general experience faced by Palestinians facing multiple types of threats in terms of their expression, not only in the digital realm, obviously, but please give us your final thoughts as well. We'd love to hear more from you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Karin, and to everyone of the panelists for highlighting the horrific suffering journalists and writers and everyone in the country are facing under the dictatorships. I would like to say that when the Israeli army targets a journalist or a writer, they would kill him or her with all their family members. We in Gaza live. You would find the parents and the siblings staying in one house with each other, especially during the ongoing genocide in Gaza. So many of the journalists who were killed with their family members. For example, Wael Dahdouh, the Al Jazeera's bureau chief, first he got his wife and a few of his children killed, and then later they killed his son, who was also a reporter for Al Jazeera. And the last attempt was on his life, when he was wounded while his cameraman was killed, Samer Abu Dagga. And yesterday we learned about the shutting off of Al Jazeera office in Israel, in Tel Aviv, just yesterday. And today Israel started evacuating east of Rafah, where about 200,000 people were living. And just imagine people, 200,000 people moving from one side of the city to the other, where people were already populating, the small city of Rafah. We have been living under occupation for so many years, and journalists and writers and artists from different fields have been hurt. I personally was kidnapped, and my safety was not guaranteed, just like many other people who were kidnapped. I think I was lucky enough to be released just 3 days after being kidnapped. Just 4 or 5 days ago, we learned about the death of Dr. Adnan al-Bursh, who was a physician, a well-known physician from Gaza. He was working at the Shifa hospital. And I'm sorry, I'm just saying this because it applies to journalists and writers in Gaza. So Dr. Adnan al-Bursh was kidnapped, had to evacuate with his fellow physicians from a Shifa hospital, and they moved to North Gaza, to the Indonesian hospital, not very far from where I used to live. And the room where he was staying was bombed, and he got hurt. A wall fell on him, and 12 people that were in the same room were killed. And then he moved to Al-Auda hospital, also in North Gaza, and he was kidnapped from that hospital in December. Just 4 days ago, the news about his death was released by the Israeli side. So just imagine how many journalists and writers were kidnapped, whether they were on the field reporting or they were kidnapped from their families, just like I was. Just imagine how dangerous it is to be not even a journalist or a writer or an artist or a professor, but just to be a Gazan living in Gaza under the Israeli occupation. So it's very dangerous. It's very dangerous even to live in Gaza or Palestine. And I hope that this will come to an end and that justice and peace will prevail in Palestine. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mosab. And yeah, just to add, with relevance to the sort of digital repression side, there was reporting in your own case that you were sort of identified, I guess, or pulled out by facial recognition software. We have heard other reports, for example, that, obviously in Gaza, sort of cell phones are a lifeline for most people in terms of news and information, either getting it in or getting it out. But we have also heard reports that Israeli authorities are using phones to track people and to find out their location, and then to obviously target them as well. So there is, a huge tie-in with various types of digital surveillance and repression going on now to target people. And in some cases, this appears to have led to their
before I go, I just want to say that being maybe a known journalist, I don't like to be called a known journalist or a famous, writer, but I think being someone who is known, who wrote for the New Yorker, New York Times, Washington Post, especially during the genocide, the first few days of the genocide, I think being someone in that position had put me in a dangerous, place. I was targeted, I think, because our house was bombed. I told you, just 8 days after I wrote that piece in the New Yorker about our house, and our house was bombed just 8 days after that. As long as I was not killed, I think my friends at PEN America and PEN International and so many other news outlets, when they spoke out about Mike being kidnapped, that helped in expediting my release. So it helped me to be known, but it won't be helping me if I was killed, because I think our house was bombed and I could be there with my wife and children. So being a journalist in Gaza or a writer could be, a privilege, and at the same time, it could be the end of your life. Thank you so much.
And thank you so much, Mosab, for joining us. I know you have to leave soon, but it's been just such an honor having you with us this morning. Just quickly, I know we have to move soon on to the next panels and openings, but I just wanted to check from any of the other panelists. We did want to sort of talk about not just problems and issues, but solutions as well. So I just wanted to open it up to Katerina or Yonatan or Paola as well, and check if you had any ideas about sort of things that could be done or solutions. I'm also going to put a few notes in the chat as well while we talk. But I just wanted to give you all of you an opportunity for just a few closing thoughts, and then I'm checking if there's any questions as well. But please, Katerina, go ahead, or any others from our panel who would like to jump in.
Thanks, Karen. I think I'm just going to echo what Mosab also mentioned about international support. While it is also kind of a double-edged sword, I think it's also still important. And help from the international community and putting pressure on the accountable parties would be helpful in making sure that the rights and the safety of journalists worldwide would be safeguarded.
Oh, that's great. And Yonatan as well. Do you have any
Yeah,
thoughts?
sure.
Okay.
I think I already alluded to yeah, a solution or like something that can help alleviate the problem, which in Eritrean case seems to be working. I understand that the contexts and situations are very different from one country to the other. However, in contexts like Eritrea, where you have absolute dictatorships and a severe brutality, I think the use of new media and satellite broadcasting from abroad has been working for us. At least we are able to to share our message, to have our writers and our producers create content and stream all sorts of message to the country. So the use of new media technologies as a tool to fight repression seems to be this interesting avenue that we have taken in Eritrea, and it seems to be working a bit. It never is going to give you a 100% solution. That can never substitute the real groundwork based writing and journalists. I never want to like even dare to say that we can do everything from abroad, because we are very limited. So I am working in a TV station based in America, and we're trying to broadcast to Eritrea. However, our biggest challenge is that we don't have any reporters on ground. So we don't have anyone who is going places in Eritrea, asking people questions and taking notes. So that sort of like that situation of trying to create content and stream it from abroad has its big and obvious downsides, because you're going to be very limited in terms of what you can write and what you can produce. However, in terms of safety for your journalists and your crew, it has a lot of potential for us. It is something that I think gives us hope, at least for the time being, until things change for the good in our country, at least.
No, that's super helpful, Yonatan. Paola, I don't know if you have any thoughts about solutions or what would help in these circumstances, from either from your own experience or from what you've seen in other cases as well.
Yes, for me, PEN International was key to making my story known in language other than Spanish and English. And I'm very grateful for the solidarity of Alicia Quiñones, Catherine Dunn, who made the Peruvian case become an important issue to follow, thanks to writers like Elena Poniatowska and the novel John Coetzee speaking out about my case. I feel that after 6 years of persecution, I have made many friends, and I have learned how essential the international community is to support writers. Thank you.
No, thank you, Paola. That's really great. Pablo has a question to all the panelists, or anyone else who considers himself an expert and would want to jump in on this as well. But looking at sort of the emerging frontiers in this realm of AI, would you consider AI an emerging threat for freedom of expression that might be used as an additional tool for censorship? or maybe a tool to identify harmful content and to protect from bot attacks on social media, or could be used in other positive ways as well. So I don't know if any of our panelists feel expert enough to weigh in or jump in on that, but that is one of the questions we've gotten in the chat.
I can speak in this sector.
Yeah, sure, Firas, please go ahead.
Hello everyone. I'm really happy to attend this event. Actually, it's my first, and thankful for Ben Swiss Raymond in Geneva. I'm really gladful to be and see you. Some we meet already, some we didn't, some just I speak with them in Malay. So I'm Firas Shamsan, I'm a writer and journalist in exile. I live in Bern, Switzerland. Originally, I'm from Yemen. I'm here. I live as a political asylum seeker in Bern, Switzerland. So I want to add something to the friends also in Gaza and everywhere where they are struggling. I want to add quite things, and from my experience, I don't see myself expert, but based on my like things like technology and social media and media platform production. First, I want to add something quickly about Yemen, which is like we noticed there is a lot of less resources coming from Yemen, which is we've been like more than 9 years in this kind of conflict, and journalists and writers, they are really accused from the both sides, including Houthi and government, and extra anyone have AK-47. So what's going on is so much terrible, where we have more than 45 journalists have been killed. We also had the worst things for journalists having been also assassinated. Like as an example, we had this miserable situation of a journalist. She was pregnant and she was with her husband, and her younger son tried to go to the hospital, and someone put an exploded bomb, and she lose her life, her baby, and the son, only the man have been survived. So many of situation happening to journalists and writers, which is they are struggling of publishing or talk. So if you are part of these two sides, government or Houthi or radicals, you are kindly in safe. You are not totally safe, but if you are independent, you have to step out, because everything you will write, everything you will publish, it will be harassed. And I want to share this, link it together with AI and technology. As an example, when we talk about freedom or publishing something, so as an example, I'll give you an example of Yemeni writer and also Yemeni activist. She live in America, which she start to speak about women's rights, human rights, which they start to create the same account, same name in X, Twitter. So they put a nudie picture of her as a naked woman, and then Twitter accused her official account to be a nude or prostitute or porn star. So you know how it's so difficult, so you cannot access. The second thing is like what they do and how they use internet to destroy the voices. As an example, it's so simple. As an example, they can attack your cancel your WhatsApp, they can cancel your Twitter or X, which they have kind of technology where people will create. Oh, okay. So when people will create an affair or just create a WhatsApp group, and this WhatsApp group, they add you as a journalist or writer, as an admin, and suddenly everyone will report you. And then WhatsApp will consider you as someone really bad who did something. So they block your WhatsApp. So one of these things to connecting or receiving information is not available. The second, there's some kind of bot in X or in Twitter, where they go in Facebook, as an example, they report you as dead person. So Twitter, and they have a lot of reports, and they have this army. I don't know if you know that's about the Qasem Soleimani. They have this Islamic radio and television, and now they have thousands and thousands of internet army, which they go to your account, report you dead, and then you have to approve you are not dead, or they report your your comments and stuff like that, which is really is going from underground. So directly Meta will try to control, but they have a lot of reports and they have to take an action. And the robot in Meta and Twitter is automated. You know, like until you got to someone is a real human, you have to go first time, second time, third time to report that you are not dead until someone, real person, have to come and approve you are not dead. Same thing in Twitter or X, where they have these bots, and one person can, with one click, have 10. If you made a hashtag, he can create silly stuff. You can see that in the Middle East, where they have this system. If you write something and then you see the hashtag full of unrelated stuff. So this is the technique it's used.
No, thank you
based
so much. That's really helpful.
Yeah.
Saeed, do you want to maybe jump in? I know you were posting in the chat that you had given a talk about AI, but maybe if you have any thoughts on AI, good, bad, both can be used in different ways.
So this is
happy to hear
a
from you
new
as
thing
well,
I've
Saeed.
learned since then, Karin. I won't go into what I've said in the speech because that goes into the adverse impacts, and there are significant adverse impacts for AI. But a lot of us are worried about, what happens to our careers and professions. And there's a nice metaphor that I've read, which is useful to keep in mind, about the cyborg and the centaur. And I'll quickly talk about that. Cyborg is where you basically entrust the entire thinking to the machine. So you merely give a prompt that give me a plot for a love story set in Gaza right now, for example. And it will churn out a plot, and you take it as it is and write it as it is. The centaur is one where the head is of the human and the body is of the horse. So it does, the grunt work is done by the machine, but the human is still in charge. And I think the only way, it's not just about AI, it's also about surveillance. It's also about every other thing that bothers us about an innovation. The way to address that is, frankly, that the human intervention has to be right. But, and this is where the big but comes in, and Firas will probably agree with me, and Mosab will also agree with me, and so will all of you, who that human is and what yardsticks that human applies in those decisions becomes very important. Because if that human is someone like Erdogan or Modi or Putin in charge of the thing, then that's a very, very dangerous situation. Not everyone is a Scandinavian politician. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, that's true.
Yeah,
And not all Scandinavian politicians are
Yeah, not
even
all
Scandinavian
Scandinavian
industry
politicians.
either,
Of course.
as we've seen in some recent elections.
Yeah.
I'm looking at other questions in the chat. I don't see any that are directed to the panelists right now, but please, any other questions, please let us know. We're happy to keep talking about this or answer any other questions if people would have.
Very quickly, I put the links to Mosab's article and his book of poems, and I urge you to at least read the article. And if you can get the books, do read. It is an amazing writer.
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly to back that up as well. But yeah, any closing thoughts from any of the panelists? For sure, we're happy to hear any closing thoughts from any of you. I mean, I can try to summarize a little bit. It does sound like from what all of the panelists were saying, that the importance of international solidarity and assistance and organizations and other writers being able to speak out when individual cases of threats or harassment are taking place is very, very important, and that they really feel, the solidarity and protection is in most cases helpful. So that, I think, is just an important point for all of us on the Writers in Prison Committee to keep in mind. And then obviously in terms of sort of practical resources, I think for all, writers and journalists trying to sort of bolster your familiarity with digital security is very, very important. Just keeping your own personal interactions online safe, your own accounts, learning, how to keep yourself as safe as possible online, particularly those writers and journalists who are working or are from, very repressive environments, or where there is a threat of transnational repression. It's hugely important to just keep yourself as safe as possible in all ways. And then, looking for resources that can help provide direct support. There are a number, I put some links in the chat as well, but there are a number of organizations that provide direct support to writers and journalists under threat. So if you are facing sort of a hacking attempt, or you think you've been targeted by surveillance, or if you have spyware on your phone, there are a number of organizations that you can reach out to help. Some of these will even go as far as to examine your phone and tell you if there is hidden spyware on it. So that I think is a, you know, for those of you who are really facing any types of threats like that, or hear of any cases or know of people in your networks who may be facing threats like that, that is quite important. And then I've also popped in the chat links to PEN America has produced a set of resources for online harassment in terms of manuals in a number of languages. That will give tips and advice for how to deal with online harassment if that is something you are facing as well, or anyone you know as well. So definitely there are resources out there. So it's very important, but it's I think also very important to just preemptively improve digital security techniques and awareness, just so you know what to look out for as well. But that just wanted to check if there's any more questions or comments from any of the panelists, or closing thoughts from the panel. That would be really great. Katerina or Paola or Yonatan? No? Okay. And I think, and goodbye to Penn Melbourne. I think they are having to leave because it's very, very late over in Australia. But yeah, I think if there are no more questions, then our panel is finished. Thank you very much to all the panelists. We really appreciate your insights and inputs and having you with us, and really, really appreciate your contributions.
Thank you for the honor.
Thanks very much.
Thank you all the panelists, and thank you also goes to Karin.